The most successful investor was Noah. He floated stock while everything around him went into liquidation. The most successful female investor was Pharaoh's daughter. She went to the Nile Bank and floated a profit. The stockbroker was filling out a job application when he came to the question, "Have you ever been arrested?" He answered, "No." And the next question, intended for those who had answered the preceding question with a yes, was "Why?" And he answered, the stockbroker answered it, "Never got caught." At this time of year, we conduct our stewardship campaign and we reflect on the scriptural themes of stewardship. Invariably, the parable of the talents comes to mind. This year, we're thinking about our relationship as co-workers for God's agenda, the kingdom. That is God's agenda, the kingdom. And this parable is set in the context of an investment team, actually, of 3. A rich man delegates the management of his wealth to his servants. And we know there's many translations of the scripture, and while we perhaps don't mind being called God's servants, those who serve, I don't know how many of you got hit in the face with slave. But that particular translation happens to use that word. As servants, we are co-workers for the rich man of this story, who is God. The rich man gives 5 talents, which was a large unit of money, to the first servant, and 2 talents to the second, and 1 talent to the third. 2 of the servants earn 100% returns by trading with the funds. This really sounds like a market event. But the third servant hides the money in the ground and earns nothing. The rich man returns and rewards the 2 who made money, but severely punishes the one who did nothing. The meaning of the parable extends far beyond financial investments. God has given each one of us a wide variety of gifts, and he expects us to employ them in the kingdom mission. It is not acceptable merely to put these gifts on a closet shelf and ignore them. God has invested in you and me, and that is a sacred trust. There's a lot of stuff on the inside of people, like I was talking to the kids. And on the outside, whether we see age or nationality or gender, on the inside, God has placed the most important things that he has to offer. Gifts and abilities, reason, experiences that can be used for the kingdom. A fiduciary relationship is defined by a person who enjoys a relationship of trust or confidence with respect to the law will impose greater, to which the law will impose greater than normal responsibilities on the fiduciary for honesty, integrity, candor, and scrupulous good faith, even if that means sacrificing the interests of the fiduciary. I remember the day that this young man who tries to help me plan for my retirement came and said, "I've got new credentials that make me even more, gives me even a more imperative to work for your good in the world." And it is this kind of a fiduciary relationship that you and I have over the things which God has given to us, placed in us as abilities and gifts. And it's out of those abilities and gifts that we create vocation, a work which glorifies God. And it doesn't need to be a big fancy work. I know how much my day is made by the person at the fast food restaurant who treats me with dignity and a sense of goodwill instead of throwing my food at me and being in a sour mood. And even more, those who have power, how they impact our lives. Like the 3 servants, we do not have gifts of the same degree. And the return God expects of us is commensurate with the gifts we've been given. The servant who received 1 talent was not condemned for failing to reach the 5-talent goal. He was condemned because he did nothing with what he was given. We look at the modern age and we see people who are very gifted, sometimes spending a lot of their time just staring at their video screens. And we wonder what the world could be like if people were not so concerned with distracting themselves from the reality of our current age. The gifts we receive from God are skills and abilities and family connections and social positions and education and experiences and more. These are all the things that eventually, when we have some kind of a responsible position in society, we apply to our jobs. They're the things out of which people see potential in us and are willing to hire us and take a chance on us and are willing to pay us for what we know how to do. These gifts are from God, and God wants us to use them and the results of using them in this world for God's mission. The point of the parable is that we are to use whatever we have been given for God's purposes. The severe consequences to the unproductive servant, far beyond anything triggered by mere business mediocrity, tell us that we are to invest our lives, not waste them. So there is no small requirement to contemplate what has God entrusted to you. Over the years, there have been many kinds of gift inventories created by religious organizations to help people come to know who they are. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to take one of these gifts inventories so that you might understand more deeply who you are and what God has given you to use. Sometimes we think that it's a sign of humility to go, oh, I'm nobody. I'd rather be an Indian than a chief. Just tell me what to do, and maybe I can do it for you. God has created people that stand up out of the dust of their lives. Nobody is beyond God's investment of time and energy. And those who have claimed their power have a responsibility to turn around and give a hand to those who haven't claimed their power yet and pull them up to stand on their feet. And I know there's a lot of self-help organizations that do that today, but that was one of the biggest gifts of the church when our membership needed to be given a platform on which to learn. Our children learned how to be leaders. Our women learned how to claim the gifts that they had in committee work. Didn't pay them, they were volunteers back then. And people were allowed to imagine that God had created all of them equally loved, regardless of the dividing points in our society. What has God entrusted to you? If you've never been part of a gifts inventory, if you've never had the opportunity to take time and really celebrate the potential that God has placed in you, come see me in my office, we'll talk about it. Go to the prayer closet and listen for God's voice calling in your life. because I know with certainty God has entrusted to you material that is needed for the kingdom. The particular talent invested in this parable is money. And somebody has suggested that it was on the order of $1 million US. I'm not going to do the computation. I'm not trying to tell you that 1 talent equals, but it was a lot of money. It was a lot of money. It wasn't $1 billion, but it was a lot of money. In modern English, the fact is almost obscured because the word talent has come to remain to be called skills and abilities only. So if you think that I'm only talking about skills and ability, I'm talking about the whole spectrum of what our skills and our ability produce for us in this life. This parable concerns money, and so it depicts investing, not hoarding, as a godly thing to do if it accomplishes godly purposes in a godly manner, both means and end. The way we use our money has to be acceptable to God, both for the goal and for the way that we do it. In the end, the master praises the 2 trustworthy servants, the 2 faithful servants, with the words, "Well done, good and faithful slave," in this translation. Well, I would rather be a servant than a slave because it denotes a certain amount of independence on my part. A slave is bound to the master by cords so tight that in one way, I would like to know that what I was doing bound me to God with cords that are unbreakable. That I am completely and totally the Lord's, because that's the only person I want to have dominance over me. Because I know that God created all of us as equal, independent, functioning human beings in this world. But to God be the glory, the allegiance, the servanthood. In these words, we see that the master cares about the results, well done, and the methods, good, and the motivation, faithful. More pointedly, it commends putting capital at risk in pursuit of earning a return. God risked it all when he gave us free will. Capital put at risk. What can we really do with my donation? What can I trust the church to invest in missions that will succeed? How will I get something in return? Are these questions that we struggle with as we try to give away some of our resources faithfully? What is your risk quotient? That's another thing that financial advisor likes to figure out. Who doesn't think mine's that high? I'm not willing to just let it go out there. And maybe you're like me. That's how I paid the mortgage on my houses, and that's how I made sure that my kids got to go to college. And yet, when I gave it to the Lord, there was always enough for me to use. And so, in this one place, my risk factor needs to be higher than almost any place else in the world, because the trustworthy owner of all that we dedicate to God's mission will not let it fail. We should invest our skills and abilities, but also our wealth and the resources made available to us at work, all for the affairs of God's kingdom. The volunteer who teaches Sunday school is fulfilling this parable. They're investing their time. So is the entrepreneur who starts a new business and gives jobs to others at a certain level. The health service administrator who initiates an opioid awareness campaign, and the machine operator who develops a process innovation. All these people can be in vocation. Their work can be dedicated to God's agenda instead of just to the agenda of the world. God does not endow people with identical or necessarily equal gifts. But if you do as well as you can with the gifts given to you by God, you will hear his well done. You know, we love to put that particular epitaph on funeral services. This person whom we loved did what God wanted them to do, and so God is saying, well done. But at that point, it's nice to know, but do you know how many well dones we need to just get up in the morning? How many times we need to know in our heart that God is pleased with us? How many times in our heart we need to be able to be assured that indeed we have done the best we can for our Father, Mother, Parent, God. Not only the gifts, but also the people have equal worth. The parable ends with the talent taken from the third servant being given to the one with 10 talents. Equal worth does not necessarily mean equal compensation. We are co-workers for God's kingdom, entrusted with valuable abilities that are capitalized in our society and used as a trade concept called money. We are no longer a trade-based culture where we exchange childcare for fruits and vegetables. We have converted our work into currency, which then is accepted for supplies. While the church may be spiritual, it is not otherworldly, I want to say. You and I have been entrusted with marketable skills, and we are God's trustees of the gifts he has invested in our care for this world. It's not all for someday, somewhere where God is. It's for the salvation of this world. The implication of the parable is that we are to use whatever talents we've been given for the best of our ability for God's glory. And when we have done that, we are on an equal playing field with other faithful, trustworthy servants of God. What has God entrusted to you? The question for the week, the question for the day. I like to leave you with questions to ponder. Send me an email. Tell me what you figured out. Let us all join together in singing.